2018 in review. News, tech, politics.
AI, social media, web video.
Facebook, Amazon, Netflix.
Winners, losers. A look back at this week and the year on Future Forward.
I'm Steve Rosenbaum.
And I'm Gene DeRose. Let's launch.
So, Gene, I gotta tell you, part of what I love about doing this show with you is it's like every week I get to like put my head around something and not be sucked into the Twitter stream and just dig deep into kind of the details of it. And this 2018 journey for me was extraordinarily exciting, and I'm not gonna lie, kind of like, in some ways, extremely exhausting. Like,
Tell you, it just never stops being end. It's both ends of it, and this was the most extreme year of the extremes of, man, there's hope, and gosh, even right down to this week, you know, the darkness. We're either at the edge of more darkness or the beginning of some light.
Well, we could talk about that. When we get to 2019. No. We get to 2019, we will talk about that because I have some thoughts about that. But so we're going to do this kind of in 4 big chapters. News, what's going on in the news business. We'll talk about AI and kind of the year that just went by and where AI is going, where it's been. Then we'll talk about tech and politics a little bit. And then maybe it all gets mixed together. We're going to talk about Amazon and Netflix, but I can't believe that it all doesn't end up one way or another tied to Facebook.
That's true.
So with that, we'll begin at the beginning and talk about the year that's just passed in news. So we found this Newsonomics article, which you and I both liked,
Yes.
by the always smart Ken Doctor.
Yep.
I mean, was there anything that let's just kind of dig into the article? You know, he has this idea that there's a reader revolution in revenue that's happening. I thought that was a little optimistic.
Taking it a little too far, and to contextualize, I do like him, and I do like the article, but more for the boxes that were attempting to be checked than that they were checked in a way that you feel solid about. So it's a great framework to discuss. And look, from the Reader Revolution one, boy, the answer is yes, but I think it's 2 key things that let's just talk about, whether you agree or not, whether they're sustainable. One is that we're in a particular period where news is drama and news is story, right? I mean, with everything that's going on, especially in the political world, it's like having a sound studio nearby for some of the biggest dramas. Forget reality programming. Reality is pretty amazing. 1 and 2, having billionaires and the biggest ducks in the pond decide they're going to throw down and really try to commit is big news, but what does it mean for everyone else, right? Outside the Times, the Post, and a few other big guys, where are we?
It's funny. I didn't put billionaires on this list, but let's talk about them for a minute. I mean,
they're part of the news story for sure. Yeah.
I guess the thing that I wonder about when I think about, Bezos versus Benioff, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're working at the Washington Post, there's no like, hey, come in at 11, leave at 3, eat the jelly beans on the front desk, file an article, go home. They're running a real business. And I don't get the sense that Jeff has any interest in Washington Post being a loss leader.
No, he isn't. But he's also not interested in making half-ass attempts or sacrificing the future for optimization of profits today, because he knows that that would have been a Hail Mary 3 years ago. Today, if you had to, maybe you could, but and they are profitable. But you know what I mean. I just think it's the good parts of the discipline, not necessarily the fluffy stuff that happens when you raised $100 million in your Series A.
So what do you think Benioff's going to do with Time Inc. though? Do you think he's going to put their feet to the fire and say, "Show me a profit," or is it really more of a vanity purchase?
Well, I think look. Knowing them and knowing the history, it feels a little more vanity purchase from Benioff.
Yeah, me
by
too.
The way, this is not a bad thing. I mean, you kind of have rich people that save things out of noble reasons, whether there's a chance or not, and there's been a history of some of that. And then you have people like Bezos that's going to save things and make it become something valuable. And in the middle, you have the Times and others who have been able to make a business, even if they've struggled, out of being a kind of a public trust and a noble cause. With Benioff, can he go from that, I'm just trying to save something, hero, to making it at least a middle thing? Can it be modestly sustainable? Because it's just not enough of an asset base that makes sense. The way a massive newspaper, they would have to make some decisions about what parts of Time Inc. really matter, and can they just be a chunked up half dozen pieces, because they sold off a lot of pieces. It isn't the 75 assets that it was 10 years ago.
I'm not sure. I have a feeling he only bought the magazine, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, do you think Time Inc., Time Magazine itself?
Yeah,
only?
I think Meredith bought the package, and he bought the Time.com brand. Anyway, neither here nor there.
Right, which may include still legacy pieces like Life and stuff and all that other. So maybe that premise is that it's like the equivalent of a national newspaper, since who knows the difference between versions of print in the past.
Exactly right. All right. So then Doctor goes on to talk about, he has this really good headline. He says, if Mike was the end of year whimper, Verizon's oath announcement was the bang. It got very little coverage, but it's shockingly, head-bangingly, heart-stoppingly bad news.
Yeah. I think yes, but I also think look, in some ways this is the coda on the 20-year death march of Yahoo and AOL and a few other things,
yep.
Right? I think part of the reason is it's escaped categorization historically, except for its few glimmers of it's an ad network, or it's fading ISP. And so I think in the context of true media, it's a kind of not even a has been, it's a kind of a never was. And honestly, I kind of feel like it's a Tim Armstrong story. It's a what the hell is Verizon going to be story. But the death knell part, I don't know. I find it a snoozer too.
All right. So anything else before we, in terms of the 2018 news business, kind of putting a button on it, any other kind of big things that you want to bring up that people maybe...
Well, I think we already covered one of his other points, which conflates with the first, which is the reversal of national news fortune is increasingly complete. I would still argue, and we won't dwell on it here, are the medium-sized newish guys really doing okay, right? Is BuzzFeed, is HuffPo, are other kinds of upstarts doing okay? And he made a sort of similar point about how the old world of magazines and specialization has found a new world and sort of specialized users with loyal audiences. And I do think that that's a notable thing to talk about, because I think it's kind of a vertical thing that cuts into, I'm pushing a lot of his points together, that has a lot to do with also the rise of podcasts. I think the ability to monetize for news and journalistic-ish purposes, targeted audiences with good product has hope, right? Like whether it's, I know you sort of feel a little different about the flash in the pan that podcasts and other things might be. I just feel like there's enough in the toolkit for good players to execute, but it ain't no walk in the park.
Every podcast I like is free. There's some ads in them, but I know the ad business well enough to know what they're paying for those ads, and that's not paying the bills.
You and I are going to have a cage match about podcasts, I think, early in the year, because I don't want to be I don't want to be a naif about the what may be the bullshit about the ad and sponsor numbers. And I would say this, I'm not sure as a standalone business anything can be there, but I've always thought, with like print journalists, et cetera, what are they doing not leveraging into other spaces? Not becoming experts at it, but, getting on the air, throwing a podcast off. They're not losing money, I don't think, on those podcasts. So I don't know. The last thing I just would say and ask for your point of view on is about, public media, public radio, public television. And I think that's a very interesting point, because I think a lot of smallish media properties have come out of that world. Could they live without it, or are they all part of the same solution, right? Does This American Life, is that a media property or just a kind of interesting little appendage of public radio?
You know, if I could ask for a Christmas wish, I would love there to be a way that public media, once you donate to them, changes your feed to the one that doesn't have the endless call for donations.
Boy,
I'd
well,
love
you
to
know
be able
what?
to say, you know what? Put your $20 or your $50, your 100, whatever the number is, and then you get the clean feed without the begathon.
Well, you know what? That's a really good point, and we could talk about that in the future too. Because I would say that I feel guilty sometimes because I found a way to completely avoid that. You know, between podcasts, time shifted show listening to and whatever. Whenever I hear that on, whether it's on my radio or whatever else, I turn it off. I think
Yep.
it's more of a problem for public television than it is for public radio and its sort of asset universe.
All right, let's move on to artificial intelligence because it's,
Yep.
we could do the news business all half hour and lose all of our listeners.
Yes, we.
All right, um, AI, we covered a little bit on the podcast, but we're not as geek as our geekism goes. We're not deeply geeky in AI. That being said, you know, it seemed like this year had a lot of promise, but not a lot of execution.
I think it's turned out, and I particularly thought that it's a rival, which I would put in quotes, into the New York kind of universe of startups and trickling into businesses was something that was happening a little faster than it's turned out to have been, because I consider that to be a kind of a harbinger of its entrance into the mainstream. And it is true still that compared to 5 years ago, when it lived in academia and deep tech R&D research, to today, it's different. But, I think with a lot of that, it goes from being sexy long term to being unsexy as it insinuates its way into our lives, right? Because it just becomes part of the stuff that we already know. There's already been personalization. It's just, unless it becomes a creepy, scary story, right? So I think a lot of it, unless it's right in the face of consumers, is less obvious, right? But when you get to speech recognition or photo recognition.
All right. Alexa, for example.
Right.
When you forget about it, it's just part of your daily life, it's not as cool anymore. It just works.
Right. And honestly, I would say that's a good example. Alexa and its brethren, they're increasingly connecting things in an interesting way, but it's still a little bit of a hack. You still have to program it a little. I still talk to my friends who are not obsessed about this stuff, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't know you could make your program your, activate your Sonos through your Alexa or turn your Netflix on your TV." It's still a lot of duct tape and string and lack of kind of Steve Jobs kind of making it snappy simple.
Yeah. Now, having said that, biometrics certainly came into its own with iPhone 10.
Yes.
And again, when it works, it's not magic because it just works. I hold my phone up and it knows it's me.
Yeah, and I would say this about that. That's a really good point, because I do think that that iPhone 10 and what's coming through in the hardware is very enabling with biometrics, and it's a big deal. I've always been saying for years that, like, the fact that the thing's sitting on your wrist and it isn't making meaningful use of your heart rate, to me that's like a kind of a linchpin to sort of tipping into something else. But the question with a lot of that is, how much is Apple especially opening that up to competitors and competitive apps? I just get a feeling with some of these apps sometimes, or capabilities that are native to the phone, that Apple isn't sure whether it wants to share or play nice.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. So before we move past AI, anything else that jumped out?
I think that the stuff that is not as forward facing but is made subtle and pretty beginning to be extraordinary advances are deep learning, language recognition, the kinds of things that really make for a more sophisticated experience, but we're not so aware why or where it's happening. That's, I would say, I would give a B+ to. I would give a C- to the things that we would think would be more obvious to us but still aren't that good. When I look at my new iPhone and it starts to present other bald-headed men in the image recognition, face recognition, just suddenly like it's accessing photos, and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to see all these pictures of me, and it's got pictures of you in it.
There you
it's
go.
Like not a good sign. I don't want to, it's, you're way too handsome or something compared to me. But it's so that's one, and then the other one is voice recognition. Honestly, from the days when we saw, Zoe Deschanel doing, Siri commercials about the weather, which is going on 5 years ago, it hasn't gotten that much better, and I find it increasingly annoying and sometimes want to shut off things like typing recognition because it just still takes my son's name and turns it into like the names of Greek gods.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, let's move on to the election. Let's do tech and politics 2018. Yep. So to me, we can carve the year in half. There's the year before we figured out that, Facebook had been, weaponized, and then so tech did good things. We'll talk about some good things because that makes you feel good. But then tech also did some terrible things. And I'm not sure, I don't know if we have enough information to actually decide which way the pendulum falls. I mean,
well, I think that's a notable point because I do think a big question going forward, I suppose there's this need to try to, what can we say that's not about Facebook specifically, but this is all partly about them, is what is the degree, what are the benefits that these networks can bring to us in terms of transparency and sourcing and the kinds of things that could give them at the very least appropriate deniability. Like I just feel like they both are screwing up and doing things that big companies do when they become evil, and they're just stumbling into things that they deserve to be blamed for, even if they're not their fault. And I said something months ago about an ombudsman. I'm moved on to something a little different, which is I'd like to see a lot of data kind of transparency in terms of like I can press a button and follow the path of the source of something. This is stuff they could do if they decided they wanted to. Anyway.
So how's this for a 2019 wish? What about 2019 is the year that YouTube and Facebook stopped being able to hide behind the "we're not a publisher" nonsense?
I think that's true. I actually think you nailed it. And in some ways, I suppose that's what we should do as futurists. It's what we're realizing coming out of 2018 because, and what a difference 5 years makes, right? Because I think 5 years ago and 7, YouTube came through a wave of lawsuits, et cetera, being able to say, we're the network, not the publisher. You can't sue us. This stuff may pop on and off. We're not going to lose billions. And even if they're not coming down to lawsuits, Facebook risks its business being in peril because of people being completely fed up with they're not being able to stand aside of this. So do you feel like also, I'll ask you an additional question to get your version of it. Is it not also a year where, not because Sheryl Sandberg sets a consultant on it, that the blame starts to spread to a few other, players? I feel like Twitter's been remarkably able to sort of not get implicated in a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, every now and then I think I'm having a bad dream, and in real life, the president of the United States doesn't make political announcements via Twitter, like, firing and hiring cabinet level people via Twitter seems not charming or modern or high tech, but like shockingly antiquated and terrible.
Yeah. Well, and then there's that. You're right, and maybe there is this, which is that Twitter itself doesn't have the inflections and the richness in a good way that lets emotion and the masking of sources get into it. It is kind of really plumbing and nervous system laid bare, right? So you can always track through and trace and find, who that you're not even following forwarded or got the most likes. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting year. And will Facebook, will something really dramatic, just like we're waiting for something really dramatic to happen with Trump and the presidency, will Facebook hit something that becomes consequential to its business, or is that just a slow drain on faith and trust?
Yeah, I don't know. All right, let's move on to a frothier and less fraught topic: Netflix versus Amazon.
Yeah.
Or in the case of the Hollywood Reporter article, Netflix versus Disney.
Right. right?
You know, I guess I have trouble. It's my mistake. I have trouble thinking of Disney as the opposition, but of course, they keep buying things, and they are.
Well, and they keep again the overtures of competing directly with Netflix are fraught with so many questions that I still find it hard to believe that it's possible that they're really going to step up that far. You know, I mean, in the end, will they recede to sort of some vertical harvesting, like, you know, sports under the ESPN or the Disney-ish kind of brand stuff, or will they sacrifice isolating their content properties to being banished in revenue only through their own path just to force things? You know, there'll be a flight of their creative talent if there isn't a rush to people signing on to some new horizontal platform that they theoretically are going to launch. Do you think it'll happen? I mean, it is.
I mean, look, the thing about Amazon that I find interesting as a competitor to Netflix is there was a moment 12 months ago, 9 months ago, 18 months ago, somewhere in that window, where literally the number of things that I thought were good quality on Netflix were paralleled by things on Amazon. And that has subsided, in part because Amazon has had all this turnover in executive suite, and in doing so has also had a lack of clarity about what it want. You know, they did a lot of indie stuff. The indie stuff got good critical acclaim, but didn't ever really move the needle. And they said, no, we want to be in the big mega hit business, and so they've slipped out of the indie space. Hard to run a content company when you're making quarter to quarter changes in direction.
Well, that may be true, and I guess I feel like because of the leverage points of the greater Amazon business and the seemingly deeper overlap between Amazon Prime and, you know, and across other products and Amazon Prime Video, I feel like they are a state. It's never been one of Bezos's thing to do the Jack Welch. Let's make a lot of money being number 2, but never be number 4 or 5 in a product category. But I feel like they're stable and a contributor, and it's got to be contributing to their bottom line. And when something like Ms. Maisel comes along and sweeps awards and makes a sensation, I do feel like they're never going to go all the way to challenging Netflix across the board, but they're solid. And it's a lot of the other guys that I worry about. Hulu has occupied a similar space, but I think it's going to start falling off. Yeah. And will anyone else rise up? I don't know. Do you feel like the vertical players? Look, some of the vertical guys, indie film platforms and things like that, documentary platforms. It remains to be seen if they can make a go of it.
Well, a bunch of them went out of business this year, which was sad.
So is it just a roll up? I
mean,
I don't know. And then we haven't talked about where YouTube and Facebook fit into this, because, you know, YouTube, in a way, they have their own niche. Whether they can go for the bigger part or not may not matter. They may not want to mess with their grassroots part of the business.
Yeah. The answer is I don't know. I mean, if you want to talk about a headline from 2018 that's going to ripple through 2019, it's certainly the mess that is CBS.
Oh, absolutely. And the where do they go from here, without a doubt, because, you know, they can go from being in a catbird seat, from not having to worry about the platform side of it, to having to make some hard choices, right? And I'm not really sure how that plays out for them.
So let's just, you know, there were a bunch of startups that went under in 2018, and Business Insider had a pretty good list of them. And some of them were pretty surprising. And so I just thought we could maybe just poke at them a little bit. So we never really followed the Theranos story particularly.
Right. Which is a 10-year, lots of controversy play where it just might have run out of steam. And what's your take?
You know, I mean, the reporting is that it was fraud.
Yes.
Lawsuits.
You know, I mean, they almost got taken out.
I mean, essentially, the things that they told their investors they were doing, they were running into the back room, sending the testing out through legitimate means, running back to the front room and saying, our magic Theranos machine did this. I mean, really, I didn't read the book, which I probably should read, just to But no, I
It's a
think
typical kind of cautionary tale of hubris and early market frothiness. I tend to feel like it's interesting in its own right, but I don't see it as representative of some wave of startup failures or whatever else. I mean, is there anything that jumps out beyond that for these guys? Because my feeling kind of is about it, which is that, look, startups fail, and there's enough of them out there in the world that, especially post, not just 2008, 10, but the last 3 or 4 years has been a frothy state for time for Series A, Series B, and so not everyone's going to make it.
so. So another name here was Rethink Robotics.
Yep.
So I really like that. I feel bad about this one because I saw them early. I did a demo with their charming robot. Must now have been 6 or 7 years ago. They had I thought, a particularly solid concept, which was that you could teach the robot activities by literally taking your human hand and moving the robot grip to say, I want you to pick this up and move it here, and then it would automate that. It was a more tangible way to train the robot, and I got my picture taken with the robot. I liked the robot. I liked the guy who was the founder. So I don't know why they failed.
Well, I think part of it is, we know this, that there's a fickleness to just the cycle of startups that almost says, if they did everything they had done the way they have done it, but simply launched a year or two ago, they would be in the vanguard. But I think what happened is, they made splashes at a premature time for a market, it sucks to sort of be old news when you're only 3 years old. But by the time a lot more frothy stuff was starting to happen 2 or 3 years ago here, even a year ago, they just seem like someone like, why aren't they a billion? Why aren't they a unicorn yet? And that's kind of crazy. I really respect what John Borthwick has done and a few others at places like BetaWorks, where they find languishing assets that just need to be kept alive for a few more years and make something of them. It feels like that's the kind of thing Rethink was. But I agree with you. It's robotics certainly isn't going away, but it's got a little time to go.
All right, so we got 2 minutes left. Let's do 2019. What's like? I'll start.
Sure.
Please, God, let VR finally show the hell up. I'm so tired of it. Is Magic Leap gonna it's got a lot of money. It's got a lot of backing. It just seemed like it was on the verge and then it went away again. I don't know.
Well, I say this about it, and which is that VR would have to be triggered a little bit by a consumer wave of something hitting really big. And I know it's a mistake to conflate that with AR, but I do worry that as the holiday season has kind of almost disappeared behind us, why haven't we heard tons and tons about it? Why haven't there been a lot of commercials? I think a lot of things just didn't hit the price points that they wanted to. I don't know what's going on, but these things aren't meant to be launched with a big wave at CES in January, right? That's like when you're preparing for the next year. So maybe you're right. But if you're right, it's because there was a little sort of flatlining on prematurity in 2018, right? We heard a lot about it. So I think you're asking the exact right question. I would more put it like, wherefore VR, wherefore AR?
Yeah. I think there's going to be some severe ugliness in the Facebook trust world, and I don't know what that means.
Yes.
But I didn't feel that way 3 months ago.
Yeah.
But boy,
you mean that unrelated. You just mean that the Facebook that boiling over into consequential problems beyond just scary sounding news stories is what may start to happen. And I agree. I think that there's one or two hardware-ish product categories that are going to make some big waves in 2019, and I can't say I know what they are, but there's just a lot of things out there that haven't quite happened yet.
I don't know if maybe it's too soon for 2019, but I still think autonomous vehicles are the game changer. Changes cities, changes gives people all this extra free time. They're not driving. They can be reading. They can be watching a movie. They can be texting. I think given
I agree.
I was in LA last week, and I had not been in LA in a long time, and the traffic was so terrible, so like unimaginably terrible. The idea that it was going to take an hour and a half to go, 9 miles, 10 miles.
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, I just had the same thing happen to me in Central California. When you try to go from the Bay Area to Central, California, you kind of run down 101, and then suddenly there are no roads left, and everyone's trying to head to the beach or Big Sur or whatever, and that's not a lot of people, but it takes 4 hours. Which brings us kind of indirectly over to Elon Musk and Boring Company and things like that. Interesting, and the right kind of ideas. But it's a little bit of a nutty thing where first there was going to be some crazy supersonic underground trains, and now we're going to be putting our cars in underground ferries. And that's kind of the latest way he's going to do it. You don't get out of your car.
And let me leave on this point. If any of our listeners want to buy me a gift for the holidays, we've done such a good job this year, I would really like to have one of Elon Musk's flamethrowers.
Oh, you didn't say Tesla.
No, I'm not over asking that,
Yeah.
But just the flamethrower.
We'll leave it on the code of just like Facebook. Is this the year coming up when Elon Musk himself goes over some kind of edge beyond which we couldn't imagine?
Have an excellent end of the year. We'll see you next year. Happy holidays.
Everyone, it's been a good year. Review us, subscribe to us. Here, this is fun.